Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Doom and Gloom. Before we talk about World War III news, of which there is no short supply, I would encourage you guys to bookmark the video that you see behind me. We released the first part of a three-part series of interviews with Dr. Hugo de Garis earlier today. And as usual, the videos that we love as creators the most tend to get the least amount of love. I'm telling you guys, this guy's predictions for the last 40 years have been nothing short of prophetic. He is a theoretical physicist, a computer scientist, and an artificial intelligence expert. And what he predicts is going to happen in the next 10 years is foreboding and mind-blowing, to say the least. So you got to go and check out that video. You will not be disappointed. It's important to be informed of what's coming down the pike, whether you are a Luddite, a technophobe, or as he calls them, a Terran, or maybe you're full-blown cyborg. You got to know what's coming down the pike. The world is about to change in ways that none of us can really, truly appreciate at this point in time. So please go and check that video out. You won't be disappointed. We got to talk about full-scale Russian mobilization. We got to talk about your share of the national debt, which is only going to get bigger and bigger. We got to talk about Lindsey Graham calling for World War III. We got to talk about Victoria Nuland planning World War III. We got to talk about the imminent counter-offensive, but apparently slowed down because I'm still seeing a lot of tanks and armored personnel carriers stuck in the mud. So I don't think it's quite past muddy season yet, but it's coming. Counteroffensive could start in a matter of hours, days, weeks. We are told Ukrainians released a new banger propaganda video in order to embolden their troops for the coming offensive. It was pretty cool, but I feel like with their production team that they have around Zelensky, they probably could have done just a little bit better. The largest land battle since World War II is coming, said the German foreign minister, unironically, I should add. Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, is calling for the total mobilization of Russia and the possible use of nuclear weapons. Doomsday planes have been abound. I mean, command and control, reconnaissance, presidential doomsday planes. I mean, the activity since those balloons went up in the air. Remember when I said that the Chinese balloon thing, that's a great excuse to ratchet up the DEFCON level, which is exactly what they've done. Well, you're seeing all the pieces moving around the map in Europe right now, and I'm going to show you exactly what is going on. It starts to look like they are seriously preparing for a showdown with Moscow. Okay, they're going to push this thing to the limit. This is not a game of Russian roulette. This is a game of chicken. This is a game of who is going to use a nuke first, basically, is what it boils down to. According to the Ukrainians, the Russians are planning a nuclear provocation at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in order to cause the International Atomic Energy Agency and the UN to intervene to stop the fighting. So the Ukrainians are saying the Russians are going to create some radiological event that is going to force some sort of ceasefire, at least along that part of the front, in order to thwart and put a wrench into the plans for the counteroffensive. Now, on the flip side, they're saying this is just some misdirection the Ukrainians are using, and they're the ones planning on attacking the plant, creating some sort of radiological incident in order to justify their lack of preparation for the long-anticipated anticlimactic counteroffensive that it may be. We have Patriot missiles being moved to Lithuania. This is serious because there's going to be a NATO conference there. They are moving Patriot missile battery into Lithuania. I'm going to talk about why this is so serious, because at the same time you have a lot of NATO warships at a Polish port. You have HIMARS along the Kaliningrad border. And Belarus, lots of weird things are going on. You got nukes rolling into Belarus. You got Lukashenko, who they claim is in a hospital in Moscow right now. You have the borders being mined and fortified, bridges being blown out. You're getting the dragon's teeth put all along the border and the hedgehogs on the opposite side on the Polish border. So it appears as though they're really preparing for shit to go sideways and possibly isolate Kaliningrad in the case of a full-blown war, so that they can take out all Russia's assets in Kaliningrad so they can't fire all of their medium-range nukes everywhere that they need to go in Europe. If hell breaks loose. I'm telling you guys, things could just blow up at any moment. When you have people like Victoria Nuland, who's like, I consider her the Karen of the planet, and Lindsey Graham, I guess he's like the Kevin of the planet. When you have them on the prowl right now, that's bad. That is bad. And they're being very open about the U.S. complicity in this conflict. And it's only a matter of time before the Russians seriously start to take a look at that. You have Prigozhin calling for the full-blown mobilization. I'm going to show you the video. I'm going to try to paraphrase, walk people through it. You got to go and watch these videos on your own to really get an understanding of, you know, where the fissures are between the private contracting groups fighting on behalf of Russia and the Russian Defense Ministry. We got to talk about USA preparing for war with China. They have a 10-point plan for how, if the nuclear war fails with Russia, they're going to be sure to get us into one with China on the Taiwan front. So don't worry. They have a 10-point plan for how they're going to arm Taiwan to the teeth so they don't lose chip manufacturing. I still haven't figured it out yet. But AI is all the rage. Look at NVIDIA's stock lately. Up like, what was it, 50% in a day? People are raging over AI because AI is the future, as we discussed with Hugo Degaris earlier today. We have Chinese warships surrounding Taiwan. One of the largest aircraft carriers in the world is in the Taiwan Strait currently. Some people think this might be real world. This might be the big one. Other people are still thinking that it's China trying to exhaust the Taiwanese defenses. They got to scramble jets. Every time this happens, it puts a lot of stress on Taiwan's military. At the same time, it prepares them. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. The Taliban skirmish with Iran, that's probably going to be a big nothing burger at the end of the day. The Taliban can brandish all of this American military equipment all they want. It's not going to be enough to undermine the Iranian government. It's going to be an annoying mosquito that eventually is going to get squashed by the Iranian military. But is the plan, some people are suggesting that it might be to subvert the Iranian government, because we know the Israelis have it in for those Iranian nuclear facilities, and they're currently strategizing ways that they can put bunker busters on F-35s and fly over there and neutralize Iran's nuclear facilities. But maybe the plan is to get the Taliban and get the CIA and the Mossad in there, encouraging the Taliban to try to undermine the Iranian regime and try to get through them that way. Possibly. But remember, as far as I know, the Taliban is a non-conventional, asymmetrical fighting force. I don't think they're going to be that good in an offensive sense against a conventional military. The Iranians have a very large and capable military, but I guess we'll see. Time will tell. Serbia and Kosovo is flaring up once again. We have Zaluzhnyi Row. You know all the mystery that surrounded Zaluzhnyi? The mystery continues. There's some videos that were put out recently, but there's still a lot of unknown things that we need to talk about, and suspicious behavior on the part of the Ukrainians surrounding that. So we're going to lay it all out for you today. Apparently, you know, he released a couple videos. They were very short. There's already rumors. Were they deep fakes? Were they really taken weeks ago? We're going to, as I've always presumed with the Zaluzhnyi Row, is that he's alive, but he likely was injured or something happened. He maybe had a health complication or something which is limiting his capacity to lead as the Ukrainian commander-in-chief. But again, I could be wrong. But that's where there's smoke, there's fire, I've said. And usually Ukrainian intelligence, the reason why this war is so hard for either side is because they both have really good human intelligence on both sides of the fence. So when you hear these rumors about stuff, with the exception of the bullshit rumors about Putin and Parkinson's disease and he's going to die in the next 72 hours, perpetuated by those tabloid magazines like The Sun, with the exception of that, any like Ukrainian or Russian intel is usually something to it, even though it's typically spun and hyperbolized for the purpose of propaganda. So let's show you the map here of what's going on. This is the big thing, okay? So we got nuclear weapons that have moved into Belarus. Let me just position this a little differently for you. Putin's spokesman says that if there is going to be some counterinsurgency inside of Belarus, that Russia will come to their aid. There are tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 troops, Russian troops in Belarus right now. So the likelihood of any kind of uprising succeeding right now, while Lukashenko is alive, they claim he's in a hospital in Moscow, but that's likely unfounded rumor because we still actually see him on film, okay? He's still making an appearance every other day, which can't be said about everybody. Zaluzhnyi. They've started to move nuclear weapons to Belarus. I thought they would have done this long ago. I'm pretty sure they already have. Anyways, these X's here, that's just the border with Belarus and northern Ukraine, which has now been heavily fortified by both sides. You have in Vilnius a Patriot missile defense battery, and this is a very large system, so it's not just one system. I don't have the picture to show you exactly how it works with the radar and all the launchers, but it's a big deal, okay? So they put this here in anticipation of a NATO summit in July. Now, some are suspecting that this is just an excuse because the big war with Russia is coming. So you got to kind of position everything beforehand. You have HIMARS on the northern Polish border with Kaliningrad. You have a lot of NATO boats right now at port, and I can zoom in there for you if you want. I think this is the port of Gdynia. Okay, it looks like my ships are covered up here. Some of you guys want to see my ships. There we go. There's my ships. There they are. Oh, they shrunk. Anyways, you get the point. NATO warships in the port of Gdynia. I'm probably saying that wrong. Gdynia. I wish we could just get a universal phonetic alphabet, you know. Anyways, this is Kaliningrad, so they're surrounding it. They're almost isolating because this Patriot missile defense, if the Russians tried to come to the defense of Kaliningrad, if shit went down there, of course they have lots of submarines, I presume, in the Baltic Sea and warships in the Baltic Sea. Finland has already said that they would cut them off up here, limit their transiting the Baltic Sea, so that would restrict access to here. So Kaliningrad could be potentially isolated, and this is where Russia would launch a lot of their medium-range nukes, possibly hypersonic nukes, to wherever they needed to if the shit hits the fan. Okay, so are the United States and NATO actually calling Russia's bluff and preparing for a first strike? Remember that it was last year that the United States altered their nuclear doctrine. As much as you think that all nuclear doctrines are just for show, which is what I would sort of think, just like DEFCON is totally top secret, a lot of things that really matter are top secret, okay? Just like the final counteroffensive plan. The same thing I think would be true with nuclear weapons. The doctrine is open to interpretation, so it's really irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. But I would say that the United States making a point of altering their nuclear doctrine, allowing for a preemptive first use of nuclear weapons in certain circumstances, you know, is a big move and might be foretelling the use of such weapons if they actually do think that they can call Russia's bluff. So this is the situation, and you got the counteroffensive that could start at any moment. The upcoming assault is a historic opportunity that Kiev cannot lose, the head of national security told the BBC. The Ukrainians put out this banger of a propaganda video, very cinematic. You can probably see it. It's all over Twitter at this point. And they're really trying to, you know, it was kind of like the rallying cry. And we'll see what happens. They don't appear to have the manpower sufficient to pull off such an operation. Typically in war, when the Russians are so dug in as they are right now, you need a 3-to-1 advantage in order to truly gain ground. Now, if they go blitzkrieg style, which would be, I don't want to use that word ironic too much, but it would be, considering they're going to be using Leopard tanks, that would be strange, but it could potentially, they could do it, and they could overwhelm Russia's defenses in certain places. The problem is the Russians are studying and surveying the entire front, so they're seeing Ukrainian movements. Ukraine is constantly moving their troops, trying to outflank the Russians and get ahead of their surveillance and reconnaissance. I presume that's the game that's being played right now, a little game of cat and mouse. And eventually they're going to converge those forces and likely do some sort of offensive when the time is right. Now they're saying, or that the Ukrainians are accusing the Russians that the Russians might try to trigger a large-scale radioactive provocation at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. The purpose of this action is to provoke the international community to conduct a detailed investigation, during which all hostilities will be stopped. In this way, the occupiers hope to get a long-awaited pause, which will be used to regroup the occupation contingent and stop the Ukrainian counter-offensive. Now, according to Evgeny Prigozhin, you gotta listen to this, okay? I'm just going to read what he has to say. He is calling for, and I'm going to paraphrase if I can, he's calling for a total war mobilization in Russia. He's talking about, he basically makes the comparison that we need to become North Korea. It needs to be all hands on deck, making weapons, manufacturing bullets, full-scale martial law, full-scale mobilization. We close the borders. We call all our family members back, because if they have to use nuclear weapons, one of the concerns is the Russian diaspora, right? If you nuke New York City, well, there's probably at least 100,000 Russians in New York City. And this is one thing that a lot of people don't think about in the modern globalized age, is the fact that there are all of these people out there, okay? And these diasporas and this cross-pollination of people around the world, which makes countries, perhaps, if they're actually, noble in that sense, they might not be less inclined to use nuclear weapons because they don't want to, of course, eliminate a large amount of their people. However, I think that in such cases, when it came down to it, you would do the utilitarian thing as relative to your own community, and you would obviously choose the course of action which you viewed as the lesser of two evils. So I don't think that that's going to be enough to prevent the Russians from using nukes if they feel the need to, just that there's a few Russians in another territory. The other thing he says is that if he was in charge, he would have used nukes long ago. And he makes the comparison of, like, let's say you continuously threaten to use, it's like having a gun. You only pull out a gun when you're ready to use it. That's sort of the analogy he makes. He's talking about, if you have a problem with your neighbor, you don't just threaten to shoot them right at the beginning. You only do that when you really need to. And because if you continue to threaten it, you don't follow up that threat with some action, then it's not going to have, it's not going to be useful at all. So, yeah, the example he uses here, you can't see it on the screen, but he's talking about using an axe. Nuclear bomb is an axe. Now, you don't chase your neighbor around with an axe, he says. Either you F him up or admit that he F'd you up. You have to prove who's right on the battlefield, he says. Now, it should be known that Evgeny Prigozhin is not a member of the Russian military. He is a private contractor, and, he's a little bellicose at times. Maybe he has a bit more freedom and leverage to speak freely about these types of things in the way that members of the Russian Defense Ministry don't have. It's a freedom they don't have, because they're more a political, bureaucratic organization. They don't have that type of liberty. Perhaps there's things that they know that he doesn't. He claims that he would have used nukes right away and that this would have stopped this whole thing in its tracks. That's one argument. But ultimately, he thinks that we may have to use, or they may have to use, nuclear weapons at some point, but that there will be a reverse effect as a result of that. And then, of course, that means that, Russians going to get some megatonnage back. And he says here, I was always in favor of the damn bomb, but we should have used it earlier, before they figure it out. We just walk around picking our nose, he says. And our decision-making time is from 5 to 50 years. That's the problem with big government, is that it gets in the way of making those decisions that you have to make on the fly in war. And that's where private contracting groups who have that flexibility, they can operate a little bit more liberally in that space. Now, we have Lindsey Graham, and I'm just going to read you what he says. He basically says that, killing Russians is the best money we've ever spent. That's what it boils down to. He's meeting with Zelensky, and he's basically saying it's the best money we've ever spent. Thank you so much. And look at that smug look on his face. Freedom or die. Now we are free, and we will be, and the Russians are dying, and it's the best money we've ever spent. So if you're a Russian watching this, and to me, NATO and the United States pretending they're not complicit in this conflict is the same thing as saying, like a hitman, who's paid by somebody to go and kill somebody else, to say that the person who paid you is not complicit in that crime is nonsense. Clearly, that's exactly what is happening here. It's the exact same arrangement for the most part. Only in this case, you could make the argument, obviously you will make the argument, that Russia invaded Ukraine and Ukraine is defending itself, but they're doing so only with the help of NATO and US weapons. If it wasn't for that, this war would have been done a long time ago. It would have been over. That's not to say that there wouldn't have been non-conventional guerrilla warfare probably for years and years, and there very well still may be that if the Russians do ultimately overwhelm the Ukrainians. You're probably always going to have that, and you would have had that regardless if NATO or the United States helped in the capacity that they have now, basically all the way up to weapon systems with 500-kilometer ranges. That's what Germany is talking about delivering next, the Taurus missile system. So it's not looking good when you have, neocons like this guy smiling like that in the face of potential nuclear escalation. It is scary. Here we have Victoria Nuland. I'm going to actually play this one for you because you got to hear this. I mean, these are the same people. These are the same people who say that, what is this here? Oh, this is Nate Hagen's. Okay, so let's see what Victoria Nuland has to say. The Karen of the planet, as I call her.
And even as you plan for the counteroffensive, which we have been working on with you for some 4 or 5 months, we are already beginning our discussions with the Ukrainian government and with friends in Kyiv, both in the civilian side and on the military side, about Ukraine's long-term future. And
So you know what that means, right? They're talking about putting nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That's what that means. Now, that might seem like a stretch, but many people would have thought that the United States sending F-16s was a stretch a year ago, but it certainly isn't now. She is talking about Ukraine being integrated into NATO, and once you're integrated into NATO, guess what? You can put nuclear weapons in that country without, too much fuss. And because the Ukrainians will already have the delivery system, the F-16, they call it the Swiss Army knife of the skies because it's very versatile. Very versatile platform, 4th-gen fighter. As far as I know, there's just a variety of ordnance. Any ordnance you can imagine, this thing can carry, including the B-61 tactical nuclear bombs. And because if you have the delivery system, you essentially have one of the most critical components of a nuclear bomb, which is the delivery system, then that means you're a nuclear power, and this is exactly what Russia doesn't want, which is why they want to push that border back as far as possible to buy them just a few more minutes, because that's what this is about. This is all about, how can we, if a nuclear war kicked off, how much response time we have. It's about a matter of 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. Okay, it's a difference between 30 seconds and a minute. But when it comes to saving your society, that minute can be a lot. And the Russians' ability to, potentially defend against a first strike from NATO. And you got to understand the Russian perspective. We think that we would never do such a thing. We would never do that because we're the good guys. But we just changed our nuclear doctrine to allow for a first strike, okay? Now, some people think that that's more tailored towards North Korea, maybe, but don't put it past these guys. We're the only ones who've ever used nuclear weapons after all, and that's the truth. You could say that we saved a lot of lives. We saved having to go to war, a long, protracted conventional war with Japan, from island to island, losing possibly millions and millions of people. True, but we are the only ones who've ever used a nuclear weapon. So that's how the Russians view it. Ukrainians are starting to train on Abrams tanks in Germany. That says it all. They're going to be Abrams tanks. They're going to be F-16s. Meanwhile, Germany is in recession. And you got the foreign minister talking about how we're about to witness the largest battle since World War II. You couldn't make this stuff up. Boom goes Nord Stream. All of a sudden, Germany's in a recession. The rest of Europe is pretty much in a recession. Let's face it, the entire world is in a recession. When you really look at the purchasing power of your dollar nowadays, it's absolutely abysmal. It's pathetic. I don't know how the average person is surviving right now from day to day. Just the price of food, the price of any travel, any sort of leisure, discretionary spending is pretty much, I mean, you can't go on a trip nowadays. It's thousands of dollars just to go across a few provinces and stay in a hotel for a few nights. Never mind, going on a vacation. I mean, Jesus. So anyways, it's not looking good. What else do we got going on here? The Zaluzhnyi Chronicles. What happened to UK's General Zaluzhnyi? Okay, so he released a video. If you guys have been watching the channel for the past couple of weeks, you know that I've had something to say about this. He was missing for many, many weeks. People say that he was busy plotting the counteroffensive. This was out of the ordinary for him because he had appeared more frequently in video, and he did miss a very critical appointment at a NATO conference, which he could easily have penciled in and teleconferenced, which I think he would be only expected to teleconference as he's currently fighting a war. So he releases this video here. Some people say he looks a little thinner, he looks a little unhealthy. Rumors swirling about, is his eye color correct? Is his one hand paralyzed? Blah, 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 blah. I never read too deeply into that stuff. What I will say, it is still suspicious, and I think in the very least, he may have been hospitalized for something else. Maybe it wasn't maybe he was not the subject of a Russian targeted strike. It would be a pretty big win if Russia actually did that. Some people speculate that, okay, they get these guys to make videos in advance so that they can release them, if they do die, they can release them to pretend that they're still alive so they don't ruin morale. I'm not even going to go there, but I'm 100% confident that something happened. Whether it was blown out of proportion or not, and he still is having a limited exposure on Telegram. People are saying, is this a deep fake? What is this? And there's still a lot of suspicion about it. So it's hard to say exactly what is going on with the commander-in-chief. Zaluzhnyi is, they're trying to keep him alive in the minds of the troops because, he released this propaganda video today, if you want to call it that, this morale-boosting video, big production, and had a guy giving a speech and rallying cry for the troops type thing. They almost need him there, right, until the counteroffensive starts. And then maybe we learn a few months down the road, slips on a banana peel and he suddenly dies somehow, right? Maybe this is written into your contract as the commander-in-chief of any military. I don't know how it works in the upper echelons, but I would presume that they might have had a contingency plan for this. Now, something we have to ask ourselves, we often hear about how good Ukrainians' targeting is. How come they could not take out Prigozhin when this guy is walking around Bakhmut and it's supposedly surrounded? Ukraine has all this HIMARS firepower. How come they couldn't take out Prigozhin when this guy is all around the front line? So, I think what we're learning is that offensive capabilities and just military capability in general, in terms of a high intensity, modern conflict, isn't nearly as good as people originally thought before this war was waged. Okay, in Vietnam, they had air superiority and they could just carpet bomb everywhere indiscriminately. They're not doing that in this war, but it's looking like it may ultimately come to that. So let me know what you guys think about the Zaluzhnyi debacle in the comment section below. Iran successfully tested a new launch ballistic missile, 2,000 kilometer range, I believe, so they can basically hit places all the way. They can go all the way to Ukraine now if they have to. And Israel is modifying their their F-15X fighters to exterminate Iran's nuclear facilities using bunker buster GBU-57 bombs. That's going to start another front in the World War. This is the nuclear bomb that goes on the F-16. So this is why I think the Russians are calling attention to this. You got to ask yourself, I mean, when are the Russians just going to do something brash? Like they haven't done, in spite of the floundering of their military, they haven't done anything reactive yet. In spite of all the attacks on the Crimean Bridge, they're really, really trying to restrain themselves, it seems, to the dismay of many of their supporters. And for the first time on Russian state-sponsored TV the other day, somebody actually criticized Putin. They actually said that we need to get Putin out of office next year, I think is when they have their elections. So I doubt that's going to happen. I think the people are going to, probably 70 to 80%. Whether you want to believe those numbers or not, that's up to you. Make sure you get your antibiotics. Deaths from drug-resistant infections set to skyrocket. The reason why is not because of preppers who stockpile antibiotics. If you're like me, you only use antibiotics when you absolutely need them. It's because of the use in various agricultural and probably the overuse in certain cases, but people who are stockpiling their emergency antibiotics, who hopefully will never have to use those, but if you have to use antibiotics, they're worth millions of dollars. Right now you can get them for a couple hundred, but that's not what's leading to the drug resistance in antibiotics. So yeah, they're saying that by the year 2050, it's going to kill more people than cancer in the United States. I guess we shall see. So this is an interesting one. And this is going back to AI. This is, what's his face? Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. He's saying that society's refusal to have enough babies is what will save it from the existential threat of AI. So he claims that we don't have to worry about people losing jobs because there's not going to be enough people to work because people aren't breeding enough. So that automation is going to come right around the time, and robotics is going to be perfected right around the time that the human race population just starts to plummet. Now, it's expected that it's going to level off around 10 or 11 billion because the developing world is still pumping out babies left and right. But as is the case in Europe and North America, we're not having too many kids. And that's a problem for the tax collectors because every person that they bring in to North America takes on some of this debt burden. Yes, for the first couple years, they may be a drag on social services and welfare systems, but ultimately the idea is they will have kids that will be born into that society that will all be debt collateral. The only way you can keep borrowing more debt, if your population is going down, then yeah, you're going to have problems with debt. So, when you're like me and you have a business, and the only people who are applying for jobs are people who are immigrants. I mean, it's crazy, but it might seem crazy. At least they're the ones who are like really hungry looking for the work. This is why people from India, when they come here, they just crush it. And they're the top earners in our society because they're the ones that want to work. They want to work 16-hour days every single day. They take the work. Nobody else, everybody else is lazy. They're doing the blue hair rainbow thing. They're too concerned with which bathroom to use or whatever the heck. And you know what? I should probably do a foray into that type of rage content, because it seems to be all the rage right now. You know, if you just talk about Bud Light and talk about that 50 times a day, you're going to get hundreds of thousands, probably millions of views. But for me, that's just a distraction right now. It's a very convenient distraction to keep people fighting with one another. Do I think that there's probably some sort of long-form agenda going on there? Yeah, maybe. And I'm probably going to make a dedicated video about why I removed my kids from school, from a school that they attended in the near future. But we're going to talk about all of that, guys. But I'll just say, just keep focused on yourself, keep focused on prepping, keep focused on self-development, and try not to get too caught up into the online polarization, because indeed, you know, it's better that the elites keep us fighting with one another when the ship is sinking so that they can get to the lifeboats. And by the time we realize that, you know, we're almost have our necks up to water up to our necks, I should say, then it's too late for us to do anything. Okay, so we got to really not get too caught up in these things. It almost seems provocative. A lot of the things they're doing, they know there's going to be pushback. It almost seems like they're trying to trigger civil unrest, a manageable level of civil unrest, whether it's between races, different genders, whatever the case may be. It seems like they're provoking people to fight with one another. They know that there's going to be an outrageous response when they try to propose these outrageous things, whether it's like, you know, some half-naked guy who thinks he's a girl reading to children or something. I mean, they know that there's going to be this dramatic pushback to that. And I oftentimes wonder, are they doing that so that we just fight with each other and take our eyes off this and World War III? Sometimes I ask myself that. Maybe there is some sort of top-down hermaphroditic agenda to get us all into this unisex globalized world so that we can, you know, just kind of drift and fall asleep into the Soma dystopia that awaits. Because in the future, I guess, if everybody's a cyborg, there's going to be no race, no sex, no nothing. I think there was a book called The Giver, and it was something along those lines where, you know, everybody was just the same in the future. Like there was no anything, because it was just one homogenous sea of people, of not even people, because we'll be modified like cyborgs. On that note, I think you guys should go and check out that video we did with Hugo Degaris today. That is part 1 of a 3-part series. I'm going to save the China-Taiwan stuff because that is still developing, but you do need to know that China is declining contacts with the U.S. military. And I should also add that Russia could cut its diplomatic ties with the UK, according to RT. That's bad, because that's what happens before war cometh. Take care, guys, and stay safe, and keep on prepping while the prepping is good, and it still is relatively good. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.